record. The second thing we do is just like smile for the camera. Okay. Because they want to have like a good shot. Okay. Well, I'm excited because my friend, Dr. Kim Dennis, is here today. Dr. Kim, that's what people call her. I just call her Kim, but I'm going to try to be a little profesh today and just be like Dr. Kim whenever I can. I'll try to remember. But she has been treating addictions, substance addictions, process addictions, food addictions, mood disorders, eating disorders, PTSD, personality disorders, all the things for more than a decade. And in 2016, she co-founded SunCloud Health and is currently their medical director and CEO. She received her medical degree from University of Chicago and completed her psychiatry residency at the University of Chicago hospitals, where she served as their chief resident. Very fancy. And during her training, she was part of the multidisciplinary eating disorders team, specializing in treating young people with eating disorders and their family. She has a serious knowledge base of eating disorders and addictions. And this is one of the many reasons I love her, is because that is not just limited to her academic and clinical experience, which is, as we all just heard, pretty intense and insane. But she has her own personal experience as a woman in recovery from an eating disorder and alcoholism. She believes in and maintains a holistic perspective in the practice of psychiatry, incorporating biological, psychosocial, and spiritual approaches. I get the chills reading that. I'm just so glad you exist. I'm just so glad you exist. Can I tell you one thing before we get started? I don't know if I told you this ever. I do love like a little reveal, like within 3 minutes, clock it at 4 minutes, reveal.
Okay.
So I've been in recovery from sugar, I think 12 years. I was just thinking about this when I was having you on. And one of the seeds, for me, at least in my experience with eating disorders and treating them, it's like, it doesn't happen all at once. You know what I mean? There's these like little moments along the way where you think like, oh, I should probably deal with this, or, oh God, maybe that's what it is. Oh, maybe this is. And I was on a webinar with you, I think probably 13 or 14 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why I would go on this webinar when I was in such when I had so many blind spots about the nature of my real problems, but I went on this webinar that you were hosting about food addiction as a process addiction. And you were so clear about it that I think very soon after, it moved some tectonic plates for me to think, oh, that's what's happening for me. Like the binging we'll get into this for everybody. Dr. Kim, my mom, has this thing about me where she says, stop sounding like such a therapist. So I always like to try like on the podcast to like not sound like such a therapist. So like people are probably sitting here being like, what's a process addiction? Like Googling process it. Sit down. We'll get to we're going to unpack it for you. We're going to make it all like manageable. But just side note, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, love you. Tell me about so I love A Fellow Wounded Healer. Love it. Tell me a little bit about like how you got into this work, if you want to.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
Oh, so good. I love people. I love that. Good. Yeah. Tell us like the dirty truth about you. I love that.
It's, I don't even see it as a dirty truth. I just see it as the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and
I use dirty truth as like a compliment. Like you know what I mean? Like the guts of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Real,
real truth.
Yeah. I grew up in an alcoholic home. There was a lot of trauma that came with that, physical abuse, there was sexual abuse. And I had always been interested in psychology and why people behave the way that they behave. So as a small child, I was always drawn to, like, they used to have shows on TV, I can't even remember the names of them, where, as part of like the police team was the psychologist who really figured out, why.
Right. They gave him all the deets, right?
Exactly.
Totally.
So those were the shows that I was like, wow, that's so cool. So it was an interest of mine all along. And I think part of how I coped with what I grew up with was excelling academically. You know, I was gifted academically and athletically. And that was really a godsend for me, you know, because it got me through, really carried me through to a place where I was able to access help and support and healing. But I was a teetotaler in high school.
Mm.
To the point where I was self-righteous about it.
Teetotally meaning like you didn't use a substance.
No
You were
substance,
clean as a
no
whistle, huh?
alcohol.
Nope.
You know,
Yep.
those people that did that on my teams, I
Right.
shunned. You know,
Right.
like
yeah, you're like those people.
Yep. And then I got to college, and that's when really I discovered alcohol and had a spiritual experience
Yeah.
with my first large glass of grain alcohol and a tiny bit of fruit juice. You know,
yes, I do.
and that's also when my eating disorder started, and just like all of the other things, all the other addictions that go untreated, you know, progressively got worse and worse and worse. And I would say the DSM-5 diagnosis that best describes what I had was bulimia. You know, with just classic binging and purging, you know, and not being able to stop that, you know, to the point where I was searching for help. You know, by the time there was an early acceptance program for medical school at University of Chicago that I applied to and got into in my sophomore year of undergrad. Wow. And shortly after that, I thought to myself, you know, like, this is something I don't want to be doing. You know, it was always a very, we call it in the field, ego dystonic thing, which is different from alcoholism, right? In the beginning, it was fun. It was social.
Ego dystonic, meaning that you didn't like your ego was like, I need to stop this. But you're saying that the alcoholism wasn't ego dystonic.
Yeah, it was normal. You know, everybody in college is doing this. Yeah.
This is fun.
And in the eating disorder world, you know, classically, but not always, restricting anorexia, which is very, you know, the thin ideal that pervades our society, the sick thin ideal, you know, really, I think impacts people with restricting anorexia to like cement in that disease as being egosyntonic. You know, like, this isn't a disease. What are you talking about? I'm healthy.
Don't tell me to gain weight. No, thank you. Right. And it's hardest to treat in that way, right? Because finding it in there is really hard.
Yeah, we have way fewer tools in our bucket to treat restricting anorexia, particularly for people who've had it for, you know, duration of time.
What's the duration of time that you see makes it easier to treat? Do you know a number?
6 to 12 months.
Wow. So after 12 months, it's pretty hard to treat. Like,
yeah. And, you know, one of the things that we're not good at as a field in mental health more broadly, which is different than, let's say, cancer treatment. You know, like, you can identify with a staging process, with a PET scan, what type of disease within breast cancer a particular person has, and that changes greatly the treatment you provide. So if it's stage 1 cancer that's just localized to the breast, that's a whole different treatment that may not even involve chemotherapy. You know, that may be a lumpectomy. If it's stage 3 cancer, where it's spread beyond the breast into the lymph nodes, that's a different treatment regimen altogether. You know, maybe surgery, maybe not surgery, maybe this chemotherapy, but not that one. And in the eating disorder field, as well as in the addiction field, we don't have that level of granularity in making diagnoses. So
for any of them,
I mean,
of the diagnoses,
there's some like broad, you know, markers.
No, Kim, this is all I want to talk about. This is all I want to talk about, is the evidence base is so unclear as to what works, right?
Yep. And what has happened is we treat everybody with the diagnosis of bulimia with the same model. And we say, well, their recovery would mean this for everybody with
Absolutely.
bulimia. And that may be true for a large portion of people with bulimia, or people with bulimia who don't also have a co-occurring substance use disorder, or people with bulimia who don't also have a food addiction piece to
Mm,
their disorder.
totally.
So, that 20 to 30% of patients who have untreatable disease, chronic and enduring disease, we need to do better to be able to identify exactly what they have and to be able to do the research around what's underlying this that might be different than what's underlying somebody who has bulimia
Right.
or binge eating disorder,
Right.
no addiction history, no trauma history. Like the brain under that person is different than the brain under this person.
And the story, I mean,
Yeah,
right? So I
yeah,
love that, because I think there's so many people that have come to me that are like, they made me sit there and do this food challenging. And I'm not like, listen, like I believe I'm with you. Like there's a lot of things that work, and then there's a lot of things that don't work when other things work. And they have said, like, I wanted to kill myself because I had to sit here and do this food challenging, and it didn't feel right to me. And then they came and they did my model, which is more of a harm reduction food addiction. And they were like, oh, this is where and vice versa, right? People saying,
yeah,
I want to do all food safe, and that's worked for them.
yeah,
But the other thing I think we're saying here, which really want to get to, I do want to talk about your story, but here we are.
yeah. I
Here we
digressed.
are. Here we are. Let's just we're getting into it. But the other thing I think is so important is like what you're saying is like eating disorders, like there's some people who have diagnosable eating disorders and there's some that don't. Is that accurate to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Same with addiction. There are
Yes.
people, but in the addiction world, we can say, we think, for person X, I think you actually have the disease of addiction, where your
Mhm.
brain circuitry has changed and flipped into this hijacked state, versus another person who may have problematic use, but they're not quite at the point where
Yeah.
their brain circuitry is flipped to the extent that you need the intensive or a different type of treatment.
That's
um,
harder to do with the food, right?
yep, much harder to do
Tell
because
me
it's so
why.
much more individualized.
Yeah.
There are so many more nuances to both to our experience of eating,
Mhm.
many more different areas of the brain involved,
To say the least.
um,
Yeah.
than our experience of drinking or using drugs.
And you
That's,
have to eat.
yep,
So
exactly.
for these people that were saying like, hey, I think you have all the criteria of addiction, an abstinence-based model, even though that doesn't always work, is probably going to work best for you. With food, we have to be evaluating and creating these like healthy life. I mean, it's just so much, isn't it?
Right. And, for the the thing that I think hurts people is when we as a field take a rigid all or nothing, like all foods fit for all people,
Mm,
and all foods fit for most people with eating disorders, but not all people. Even if we say, do all foods fit for a person with biopsy diagnosed celiac disease?
no.
Nobody would say,
Right. Or for
we're gonna
peanut
do
allergy. Right.
right, we're gonna do a peanut challenge today.
Just today, right now.
So it's
We
similar
want
to
you to
that.
eat peanuts so badly. We want you to enjoy them so badly. They're so good. Let's challenge it right now.
Yeah. But this is also what happened with, if you look at the history of treatment of alcoholism in our country, right? The early treatments were all about, getting the alcoholic to drink like a normal person.
Mhm.
Like it was very hard for people who were not alcoholic or who didn't have the medical knowledge
Hmm.
about what's going on in their brains to understand that I can take 2 drinks and be just fine. Why can't you?
Right.
You know?
Right. No, I mean, it's such an interesting field to be in. And I have to say, when I heard you talking about food addiction, like I always knew that that was my truth. And then I think because the rigidity in our field in general is I didn't like what this really rigid food addiction world was saying. That didn't suit me at all. right?
Yeah.
Because I just felt like the people I knew there had these really little lives and they were bringing their scales everywhere. And I was like, yeah, like
Yes.
that's never going to be my truth. Like, and they were like, no salt on your food. And I was like, okay, so I like to go out to dinner and I want to have a big life. So this is like, so, and I'm really feeling stuck in that and knowing that intuitive eating almost killed me. And I was just like, and then I was really stuck in diet culture as my middle path,
Right.
sadly.
Yeah.
And then I heard you talk more about this idea of, like understanding more about what the substance did and what the process of substance being the sugar and the flour. I don't know if you go there, but, and then as you were talking about it, that the other part, the process addiction of the eating, of the hand to mouth and the eating and the binging and that the overeating, you can tell it better than I can, what the overeating does as an addiction, as the process. Can you talk about that quickly? Because I
Right.
think a lot of people's heads in the best way are going to roll off when you talk about the process addiction of food or of binge
Yeah.
eating.
Yep. So, um,
But like, as
and
my mom
and
would say,
I'll just
like we're at lunch, like we're just having
okay.
an easy breezy. Like, what's an easy breezy way of explaining process addiction, Kim? No big deal.
So, first of all, I do want to acknowledge that being an eating disorder professional and even like having those words, food addiction, come out of my mouth,
I know. We
you
wear
know, there are
scarlet
certain
letters. I
there
know
are
we wear
certain
you.
circles that shun me for
Oh,
that,
me
and
too. Me too. Nobody
I'm
likes
okay
me.
with it.
Me too. I had to learn to be. I had to go to a lot of therapy to learn that, but here we are.
Yeah. So, and again, it's really about matching treatments to patients, individual patients, and what works for them, you
Hmm.
know. So, and there's capacity within food addiction to have intuitive eating within food addiction
1,000%.
that people don't quite get. Everybody's all about DBT, both and, but when you
But
hear
not
them
here.
talk about their treatment models, it's
Oh
either
my
or.
gosh. One of my best friends, she was bulimic and did food addiction model for 2 years and then was like, I'm going to try to reintroduce food now. I'm feeling pretty good about it. And she
Yeah.
did. And she's the happiest little clam I know.
Yeah, well, and that's the other, I think, major difference with food addiction, um, food as substance addiction, which
Mhm.
is different than a process addiction revolving around food, is that the what works food wise can change over time.
Absolutely.
Once the
Which makes
brain,
sense because when you think about it in the endocrine part of it, when you think about it hormonally, it's like that can restore, I imagine. You're the doctor, and then you
yeah,
can tolerate more.
right, and it's also getting people to connect on a deep enough level to their body and be
Mhm.
awake enough to their body to know, what is where that line is between this is pleasurable and this is like too much for my body.
Yeah. I mean,
Does
that's
that make sense?
yes. I guess my question always is with intuitive eating is when we live in such a non intuitive environment, like to me, it's like, if I don't know, like the idea that I wake up with an alarm clock is opposed to intuition, right? Or I was with my friends this weekend and like one of my best friends, and she's like a Buddhist meditator. And she was saying, gosh, when her kids were eating all this chocolate, she said, I really wanted to eat that chocolate, but I had to really think and I had to stop and I had to really decide whether or not I wanted to have that chocolate. I was like, well, what are the rest of us supposed to do? You're like a Buddhist meditator. And here this was her process of finding her intuition. I think finding your intuition is really hard. And then you are eating more from an emotional space. Now, it's like, that's what it always, to me, like the
Yeah,
structure of how I live is just makes my life so much easier.
right. Right. And I think it's a process, and it's a journey, and it's the journey inside,
Yes.
which is not going to be, it's a messy journey. It's a fumbly journey, like
Well,
we fumble
totally.
into our truths, especially when it's something that, where there's an intersection of a process and a ritual around food
Yeah.
that may intersect with certain food substances for certain people, but not for other people.
Well, that's the whole problem. I mean, I have an idea of what your answer is, but are you on social media? You're
Um,
not, right? Because you're so
no.
cool. I know, that's great. I know. I knew
I
it. I
mean,
knew it.
I
Like
think I
you're
have
aware of what it is, but
I
you're
have
not
a
actually aware
Facebook
of what's
account
going on.
and
Right.
I
Good for
have
you.
a
Good for you.
LinkedIn account.
Yeah.
but I don't really check them.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
I'll do it for you. I'll tell you how it is. It's exhausting. It's overwhelming. And I think what's happening on there a little bit, which I'm actually participating in now, is that there's a space that's saying that like intuitive eating is like the only way. And that anything that isn't, by the way, the internet's as it goes here in America, the internet's definition of what intuitive eating is not actually the definition of intuitive eating, right? Because like we're having the author of Intuitive Eating on next week. So I'm so excited to talk to her about this too. I
She's
can't
amazing.
wait. Yeah, she is. And but I think what's happening as it goes in America is that they're saying, well, if you want structure around your food, that's diet culture, and if you
Right.
want, and if you're not able to eat donuts every single day, then like that's diet culture if you want them, right? Like there's all of this happening, and to me, it feels a little gaslighty.
Yeah.
Right. To me, it feels like, hey, there's something really wrong with you if you can't just eat what you want.
Right.
I'd love for you to shine some, Dr. Kim light on that for those of us who feel that way. And by the way, if you don't feel that way, like good for you. Like that's amazing. If you really are feeling comfortable with eating whatever you want, that's great.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you used the word gaslighty.
Oh, good.
Because I think that's an experience that many people who have eating disorders and trauma experience.
Can't wait to get to that.
Because when you've learned from a very, very early age that your feelings are not to be trusted, and your body has been the container for pain or rage or shame.
Yeah.
The last thing on the planet that sounds like a good idea is go deep inside and trust your gut.
Oh,
right?
Yes, of course. Yes.
So, I
and
think
that might be more of a process to get there.
Yes, exactly. That needs a lot more support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy, depending on, even with years and years and years of recovery, depending on your level of connection to spirit inside, to yourself on any given day, it's easy to get knocked out of your truth and be like, wait a minute, I've been doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
Or, oh my gosh, what if they're all right and I'm all wrong? And the truth is there is no all right or all wrong. So when I hear anything that is full of dogma and this is the way.
You should be able to do this.
Yes. Is that has some amount of disease attached to it for me. Because the world is just not that simple.
No.
And our patients are just not that simple. Our bodies are not that simple.
Exactly. I mean, it's really, it does simplify it to such an extent. I mean, I'll be honest, like I have a supervisor as we all do. And I went to supervision with my supervisor because I was like, should I be intuitive eating? Like I've been off sugar for so long. Should. And I was like, she was like, no, you're really doing the right thing here. It's like the dogma was even impacting me. And I've years and I've written books about this. And I have like it's just, and I think in vulnerable moments when you see it over and over on your screen, like you're bad for doing it this way. I guess I say that only because I can't imagine. I have so much of my own knowledge and wisdom and support to be scrolling through looking for an answer, feeling lost looking for an answer, and then to see that and have it not be your answer must be really overwhelming.
Yeah, well, it's similar to like the way we approach, the way that I think is most useful to look at it is look at your life. Like if your life is big and expansive, if your relationships are healthy and fulfilling, if you're living from a place of love and truth and absence of shame, opposite of shame, then I think something is working in your life.
Me too. Yes.
So I think that that needs to be the litmus test of whether or not a particular form of treatment is working for any given patient.
It's real because if you think about it, that's what the diagnostic says for addiction, right? Like, does it impact you socially? Does it impact you emotionally? Are people worried about you? Do you need more? It's not just like, do you need more of the substance? That's not the only question that they're asking in that.
And also the cognitive piece, the cognitive aspect of having an eating disorder is way more intense, generally
Say more about that.
than
Say
with
more, because cognitive
addiction.
is, what do you mean by cognitive?
So I mean, like the ruminations about,
Mm,
is my body okay? Are these calories okay? Should I do this or should I do that? Or
the
what if
chatter.
should I have
Mhm.
had a little bit more or a little bit less or a different type, you know? And I think one of the ways we know, one of the ways I know if the model that, that the patient wants to try and that we've agreed on trying for their treatment is working is we can actually measure what's going on in your head.
Mhm.
There are actually some pretty good standardized tools to use to measure the severity and intensity of eating disorder thoughts, the
Mm,
obsession,
mhm.
and if it's somebody who has what looks like a food addiction because of chronic dieting or chronic deprivation,
Yeah.
um, those thoughts aren't going to get better, even if the behaviors subside, if they're on a no sugar meal plan or a low
Mhm.
sugar meal plan,
Mhm.
right? But if it's somebody who truly has a food addiction,
Mhm.
those obsessions are and the behaviors are going to decrease with the addition of a low exposure meal plan.
Mhm. It's so hard to figure out.
Yeah,
And we're
it's very
talking about
complicated.
diagnosed eating disorders here, which everybody, I think the other piece is like everybody doesn't have those, right? Like
Right.
there are some people who don't have diagnosed eating disorders, may have some like big overeating problems, don't have binge eating disorder, and do
Yeah.
well with other things. That's why I think we don't have that same conversation with substance, right? And
Right.
there's some people who can casually use all substances,
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and also, orthorexia, which is a piece of people who don't have eating disorders.
right? What's orthorexia for those at home?
Right. So orthorexia is basically an obsession with healthy eating, clean eating.
Mm.
For some people,
I
it's
hate the word clean eating more than life. You want to know why? Because the opposite of it is dirty. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, ugh,
right.
I hate the word. Oof. Sorry, go
Yeah.
on.
And that can be that too can be a part of a diagnosed eating disorder,
Yeah.
and a
I'm
treatment
glad you're
target.
not on the internet. If you were on Instagram, I think you would be so triggered out because there's so many people hiding health, like hiding eating disorders through health. It would really, your head literally might explode if you were
Yeah.
scrolling through the feeds
No, I
that
mean
so many of our patients are.
I see it all the time. My patients see it all the time. They do research,
They're actually making it look like orthorexia is like sort of a good idea.
Yeah.
I had someone
And
comment to me today about like, I just don't know if I can add in fruits and vegetables. It feels so scary to me. I was like,
yeah,
there's so much more I want you to add in. Those
yeah,
are just happy spaces for people,
yeah. And medicine doesn't, medical doctors do not help with any of this.
Tell me more.
I mean, no, very, very few primary care physicians, family practitioners, surgeons, GI doctors, cardiologists ever get any training whatsoever on eating disorders.
Mm,
And they're very BMI focused.
yeah,
Like BMI is a measure of health. It's not.
right.
It's a number. There are way better indicators of health, both mentally and also physically.
What
Like
would you say are good indicators of health if people
yeah,
wanted to go study it up? Like, how would you say someone should go measure their health?
what's your blood pressure?
Oh, that's a good one.
What's your blood glucose level? What's your fasting blood glucose level? What's
Yeah.
your cholesterol level? And those indicators um, can those are much more closely aligned to cardiac health than a person's BMI. So you
I'm
can be
also,
a whole range of weights and be very healthy,
yeah,
and get pleasurable
totally.
movement in and, you know.
I'm
So
also,
medicine is like, don't eat sugar. Sugar is bad, like don't eat carbs.
yeah, I think I'm so into this idea of how's your life?
Yeah.
Because the podcast, as you well know, is called What You're Craving, right? And
Yes.
I feel like I treat a lot of people who are turning to food for nourishment, nurturing, are really stuck in stories about how sick they are, or not in the really, and like, what do you think are some of the underlying reasons people have eating disorders and are
Yeah,
turning to
well,
food, and they're in body obsession and all that noise that
yeah.
you're talking about, that cognitive stuff that you're talking about?
So I think it's multifactorial. Genes are a big part of it. Cynthia Bulick in North Carolina is doing great genetic work looking
Yeah.
at, the genes underpinning anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder.
So you're saying it's like inherited in some ways.
So there's a component of it that is, and then
Mhm.
there are early life experiences, and
Mhm.
then there's the culture that we live in. And I want to talk about culture and media, not only in the macro sense, which is important, but also in the, you know, what's the culture in your family?
Mhm.
What's going on in your household? Does your mom eat a salad every night for dinner?
Mm.
Does your mom talk about her body? Does your dad, exercise for 2 hours every day?
I
Um,
mean, this is
are they
really, that's so important to talk about though, right? Because healing yourself, like parents will come to me and they'll say like, well, what should I do about my kid? They're 9 and I watch them have food problems. And I'm like, tell me about your relationship with food. That's my first question. People
right?
don't usually come back for a second appointment after that.
Right. Well, I think it's important to talk with families again, and most families really want, they're really like dying to save their kid and
Yeah.
terrified about
Right.
what's going to happen to their kid. And um, you know, sometimes family members also have diagnosable eating disorders, but many
Yeah.
times they're able to make and willing to make shifts around things that aren't diagnosable eating disorders but can impact their kid with an eating disorder, like
Right.
how they're exercising, how they're talking about food,
Or their
what foods.
bodies, right?
Exactly, exactly.
It's just so important to remember. I mean, I just think about that even, you know, as a human, as I walk around talking to people. I mean, we impact each other in such a big way, and how we talk about ourselves and how we talk about it's just so important.
Yep, and early messages too. I think in schools,
Yeah.
like I have a 6-year-old who's in kindergarten, and they just went to full day school, so he hasn't had snacks at school, and
Oh,
obviously he has some genetic loading. He's my kid, my husband has his own,
stuff.
yeah, which he can come on and talk
Right.
about,
Well, great.
but
Next week.
but they sent a little thing home saying like their you can please send an afternoon snack, but it can only be fresh fruit or fresh vegetables.
Wow.
And I'm like, you can't tell me what my kid can eat for a snack. First of all, that, and second of all, like, what kind of message are we giving?
Seriously.
And I get the public health. Everybody's worried about obesity, but the messaging needs to be way more nuanced, and it needs to have at least some component of eating disorder awareness and what the messages kids are getting in school about, like, fitness, fitness, fitness,
Yeah.
only eat healthy foods, so this good bad
So we're,
dichotomy around.
yeah, what I hear you saying is like that when we start by putting like, well, that the only thing I can eat for snack is fruits and vegetables, and you're talking about early programming, how that reads 20 years later is, well, this food is bad and it's forbidden, so now I need to eat it, and all of the defiance comes out. And
Yeah. And
yep.
then I'm bad for eating this
Oh,
food,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or I'm bad because my body looks a certain way,
Yep.
so I think that's,
And the
that's a
story
big
starts, and
too.
and as you tell the story starts, clock it at the day he went back to school, right?
Yeah.
Like 6 years old. It's
Yep.
hard to untangle those stories when you're in offices like ours, isn't it?
Yep. Yep. And I look back at my own story, and you know there weren't other people in my family that had eating disorders, but there was a lot of negative talk,
Mhm.
about my mom's body from
Mhm.
my dad,
Mhm.
who was, sick with his own alcoholism.
Mm.
um but in schools, teachers weren't talking to me about my BMI.
Right.
Teachers weren't saying like, you can't have chips for your snack, or you can't have a Reese's
Were you a
peanut
heavy
butter.
kid?
No, I've always been like pretty like average weight,
Like I was a heavy kid. And
Yeah.
so everyone was talking to me about that at school.
Okay.
Everyone, my mom
Well,
was hiding
yeah.
the food, like, and my teachers knew that I couldn't have it. And let me tell you something, in third grade, when it was bake sale day, like I was like, talk about your police shows. Like I was stealth at how I
Yeah.
could sneak food. I mean, stealth. I'd go into the classroom during gym and I'd steal their food. I mean, it was really, and by the way, when you're talking about trauma, that will do something to your personality. I mean,
That
that will do
that is
something to
trauma,
your, yes, thank you. I
you
really
know,
appreciate
like
that.
that
Yes,
is
it
an
is.
assault on your being,
Yes, it
and we
is.
do that over and over and over again to kids who are in larger bodies,
Absolutely.
whose bodies are perfectly fine,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
And listen, I think it was my mom's concern, and I think there was some accuracy to it, but it wasn't necessarily the solution I needed was to control the food.
Yes, control is never the solution,
It was not necessarily the solution I needed. And yet, best she could do at the time. Right. And I think
Yeah,
it's so hard for parents, and especially, with the processed food stuff and that just being so clearly not the greatest thing to give to some people, with the research coming out about that too. But
right.
and yet, right? Only fruits and vegetables aren't the answer. I mean, it's so tricky. The whole thing is
Yeah.
so tricky.
Well, and I think it's so hard for patients, when they're adults, and it's so hard for families who have kids who are struggling to navigate, who is a good provider
Right.
and what treatment should I be pursuing for my kid?
God, it's like you're reading my mind, because I do this parallel process when I'm sitting on podcasts and I think to myself, okay, what's the listener thinking and feeling right now? As though like I know, but whatever. My assumption is this: I'm listening to this podcast being like, okay, so what you guys are saying is there's really no one clear thing that works. Shit, like, so there's this like there's this like pretty amazing doctor talking. I relate to what she's saying. She's saying this, she's saying that. So basically, like, I would be like, what do I do? I do not want to leave anybody listening feeling worse than they started. So
Yeah.
let's talk solution. Like, let's talk about how people can conceive, how people can think of themselves wanting help, feeling empty, feeling lost about their relationship with food, feeling like I can't stop eating, I can't stop body checking. What would you say they can do? How can they assess themselves? What if they can't get to amazing treatment like yours,
Yeah. So I think first, the first thing that comes to mind is, we have to start somewhere,
Yes.
and for myself and for every single patient that I've ever treated, their answers are within. And my job as a physician, or the therapist's job, is to guide them and to be the person that can be a second pair of eyes around, like, okay, we've tried this, or you've tried this in the past and you said it didn't work for you. So why would we try it again?
Oh, Kim, I think we need to stop there. I'm in love with that answer. I'm just in love with it. I can't help it.
Yeah.
Right. It's true. Like, right. Like someone will say, like, can I eat this protein bar? I'm like, why don't you go see it? Like, tell me. I can't tell you if you can eat that protein bar. But I
Yeah.
think that's where diet culture comes in terribly, which is to say you're bad if it doesn't work and you're good if it, do you know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
love that
So
you say that to
take the
people.
judgment out of it and do the experiment. Just
Mm,
don't do it alone.
that's the quotable. Take the judgment out of it and do the experiment. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I wish we could just do a whole podcast on your story because we didn't even get to it, and it's dope. But like that experiment you might have like 10 rounds. You might have 20 rounds. And
Yeah.
that's not good or bad.
Yeah.
That's just science, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think I left off my story in college,
Yeah, we left off
and
at like you weren't even out of your bulimia yet. Your
but this
alcoholism didn't
is
start yet. I mean, I got to tell you, there's people like we'll probably have you on again because like we really, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
totally, we
But
blew that
part
one.
of it was like I went through, probably a good 5 years of trying to get help,
Ugh,
and people had no idea how to help me, to the point where, and I was on a college campus that had in the hospital an eating disorder, outpatient eating disorder program for adolescents, led by a world famous eating disorder researcher, Daniel Lagrange,
yeah, oh,
and
he's
the
really famous. Yeah.
college campus people were like, well, we can refer you to this. You've had your 4 sessions here. It's not that bad yet. which I was like, why are you saying that to me? It feels
Well, I mean,
really bad.
and
you
also
know?
like, why does it have to get really bad before you can help me? Like, what is wrong with our system? Like
Yes.
you're
So
screaming, but like, what would we say to that person? Like, could we like, okay, let's like treat Dr. Kim in that moment. Like, what should have been said to you? Like, what should
here's
have
an eating
happened?
disorder specialist who can, who can help you with a treatment that is specific to your eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Who can help you identify what, today I would say to that person, here's a provider who has, I might say, I think you should try CBT first,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cognitive
specific for
behavioral
eating.
therapy. I think you
Yep.
might try cognitive behavioral therapy first.
This is an evidence-based therapy. It works
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. Give it a try. Here is a clinician who is trained in it,
Mm-hmm.
experienced in it, and an eating disorder expert.
Mm-hmm.
So not just run-of-the-mill cognitive behavioral therapist who doesn't know anything about eating disorders,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but somebody who knows about CBT for eating disorders.
What if, what if in that moment you didn't have any money and you
Well,
couldn't
I
go to a
didn't.
provider? I mean, same,
Like
same
I was
here.
a poor college
Me
student,
too. And I was just screaming at the top of my lungs, nobody's helping. I was so angry. Oh my God, I was just full of rage.
Yeah. And my student health only covered, a very limited number
What
of
would you,
people.
what would you say to her? Like,
So eventually so I blew through like 2 or 3 therapists who were like, oh God, like
oh, babe,
I
that's trauma
know.
too. I'm with you. I'm holding
I
you.
clearly remember leaving someone's office in Hyde Park and them like looking with like horror on their face and deep concern on their face, like, I really hope you make it back here next week.
Wow.
And that was like what they sent me off with, you know.
Just
Um,
a lot of shame, huh?
yeah, so what was pivotal for me was involving my family,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom and my sister said, we will pay for you to see, this therapist who is a good therapist. And I didn't have access to what he recommended, which was like inpatient or
Right.
residential. And even
Right.
if I did, I would not have gone.
Right.
Like I was in medical school at the time, and you know, my answer to him was like, first of all,
Right.
I don't have the
Zero.
money, and
Right.
second of all, I would never, ever, ever do that.
And we see, don't you
Um,
see that all the time? Someone's like, I have to get to
yes,
work. I can't take the time off. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
yep. So the other component was, like he met me right where I was. And he got me connected to peer community support.
Me too.
And that too, I was like, I will not go to those things or be with those people,
Me too.
you
Sat in the
know?
back with a hat on, like the paparazzi was stalking me, I swear.
A hat, yes. So I have a dear friend who I've known for 20 years now, and who is always like, Kim, do you remember like you with the hat and your big jacket? And I'm like, honestly, I don't even remember that person.
In my peer support group, there was three, it was a big one. There was like the inner circle, there was 3 circles. And I like sort of knew I was getting better because in the beginning I'd be like hat in the back, third, third cheer. And slowly
Third
but
circle out.
surely. And by the way, as we're saying, it took me like 2 years, like slowly
Yeah,
but surely, like, and then I was like, I was like leading the meeting by the end, but like,
right, of course. Yeah, so I think there are resources today that I was not even aware of, and that probably didn't even really exist in the way
yeah,
that they do today. So
I think that's
NEDA
right.
has a peer mentorship program. The Alliance for Eating Disorder Awareness
Mm-hmm.
has groups, therapist-run free groups.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I think the
so
12 steps are can be really incredible there, which,
yeah,
I think
and we have more of them now too for eating
absolutely.
disorders.
The other thing, just to talk out of both sides of my mouth today, I think, Facebook has some good stuff going on too, right? Like there's like a
I've
lot of Facebook groups that like
Yep,
I know, like I have a community that I've never seen kinder, nicer, less judgmental, amazing people. I'm like shocked. I just go there to get faith in the world, I'm like, oh God, people are loving. Okay, here we go.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's the upside of social media today. It gives a
It's
lot more people access to support.
yeah.
I think one of the benefits of what we've all been through this last, year and some change is telehealth, I hope and pray, is here to stay,
Yeah,
because people in Southern Illinois who have one psychiatrist, within
absolutely.
2 hours of them have access to addiction care and
But I
eating.
do want to come and hang out with you soon. So there's that,
Yes.
you
Well,
know.
I'm fully vaccinated. We'll
Me
still
too.
socially
Me
distance.
too.
And
But so I think what we're saying is, okay, if you're feeling like a little unsure, number one, peer support is amazing, right? It's like that's really the antidote to shame
yeah,
completely, right? I
right.
love this idea of what you're saying about the truth is really lies inside of you, and that may take some experimentation
Yeah,
to see what works and what doesn't, right?
yeah,
And then if you're able to, accessing someone who is really qualified to do the work with you,
yeah, yeah.
and
And I
someone who
think,
tells you you must eat all foods, even though that doesn't resonate with you, or someone who says you can't eat all foods when that doesn't resonate with you, isn't your person. That's not about you.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Anything
Yeah.
else? Any other little tips? I feel like you have 1,000.
I'm sure I do.
Well,
I
what do you
think the
think?
other
Like, yeah.
another piece that I think is critical for people with eating disorders is to have a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
as a member of your treatment team,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who can give you specific guidance around food. And that's another really, really hard piece for people to find somebody who has eating disorder experience, because many people who are interested in nutrition themselves may have some, let's say like obsessive compulsive personality issues around food or
Yeah. It's
health
really
or
interesting though, right? Because that's not like when you get the RD, and some of my closest friends are RDs, but like when you get the RD, they're not like, hey, are you recovered from your eating disorder now? Right. So, I mean, that's true, right? I mean, well, there's no, even for social work, they're not like, hey, so did you heal the trauma yet?
yeah,
Right. They're like, no, here's like your LCSW. You're good. I healed my trauma. I don't know about you, but I did a lot of my work while I was practicing, and I've had to deal with my own shame and my own stuff around letting that go. But we trust. I think this is really where the intuition, like our own like guts, like if you're
yeah,
sitting and I've sat a little bit of an opposite story with you. Like I've sat in therapist office when I was in college, them being like, you have to learn how to mindfully eat this raisin. And I'm like, this raisin is making me want more raisins. That's all I can tell you. Right. Cause
yeah,
I'm really 12 out of 12 diagnosed food addict, period.
yeah,
And I went to so many of those places being like, this isn't working for me. And them just being like, well, just try a little harder,
yeah,
and my guts were like, get out of here. I mean, I
yeah,
used to just like leave and go smoke cigarettes and eat Cheetos, but whatever. And then come back to
yes,
treatment, but it's another story for another time.
yes. Well, and I think that's the other piece about food addiction too, is so many eating disorder professionals tie it to diet culture and weight loss programs. And somebody's weight might not change at all if they
Mhm,
recover from a food addiction.
mhm,
Like their life will change, their behaviors with food will change. Um, their weight may stay the same. Some
mm,
people may gain a little bit of weight,
mhm.
or a lot of
'Cause
weight.
but what about when you deal with the process addiction of binging? We didn't even get to that.
Yes. So, the process addiction of binging, that too requires, let's look at, and it's similar to restricting anorexia,
Mhm,
right? Because there's like talk about rituals and anxiety relief, immediate anxiety relief from not eating,
mhm.
which is hard for most people to understand unless they metabogenetic makeup, metabolic genetic makeup of
That's the most
anorexia.
complicated word I've ever heard.
Um,
Official.
so with a process addiction, it's like a running addiction. It's like a gambling addiction,
Right.
right? You're not in, it's not about the substance, if somebody's is a gambling addict and they are drinking, you know, I don't know, iced tea when they gamble. It's not the iced tea
Right. They're not
substance.
ingesting something, they're doing something.
Right.
Right.
And with food too, a person can have a ritualized, addictive, obsessive, compulsive relationship with the process of shutting the shades, sitting in my, lazy boy recliner with
Yeah.
a full bag of or 2 bags of whatever.
The menage a
Um,
trois. I'm with you.
exactly. Exactly.
I
Um,
mean, I relate,
so if there's a nutritional component, um, just like with alcoholism, if somebody's been, consuming massive quantities of alcohol for a year or 5 years or 10 years, they're going to be nutritionally depleted,
Mhm.
right? So there's a nutritional component to their recovery, but it's not like about the food, it's about replenishing their body. And that's similar to process addictions with food.
Mhm.
The addiction piece really is around, well, let's look at what are the cognitions underlying this? What are the emotions underlying this?
Is the addiction piece of process addictions though, like quantity of substance and how it like anesthetizes? I just remember you saying this once.
Yeah. So it's dose dependent.
Oh,
Um,
say more.
you
Can
know,
we like unpack that?
yes. So if, one of the characteristics of addiction is it gets worse over time and people
Mhm.
develop tolerance,
Right.
right? So what may start with, having, I
Like
don't know,
7 cookies.
7 cookies
Mhm.
over time untreated turns into, 10 cookies, and then two
Right.
sleeves of cookies, and then 3 bags of cookies.
Right. Right.
So
Or
because in order to get the same effect, um, because the brain adapts, our brains adapt to whatever it is we're doing, you
mhm.
know. So the brain gets rid of some of the dopamine receptors,
Yeah, the feel
puts
goods. Right, the
puts
feel
the brakes
goods.
on it,
Right.
and that's problematic for 2 reasons. One, it means you need more to get the same effect. And two, it means when you stop or try to stop, you don't go down to like feeling like okay, you go
Yeah.
down to feeling really bad,
Yeah. And
you
then you
know?
like try to just watch TV, which is usually really lovely. And you're like, well, this sucks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So it becomes more about uncoupling, the behaviors with the routine, so eating needs to be changing people, places, and things around eating, not
Mhm.
necessarily changing the food that you're eating or a particular
But
substance.
sometimes it
So
does. Sometimes for some people, it does have to do with changing the food that you're eating. But
absolutely,
this is what we're saying about
absolutely.
biodiversity. Because, like, I hear you, but also there's a ton of people who, when they switch out of eating like high sugar, highly processed foods and they go to more whole foods, even, like they're like, oh, wow, I don't
Yeah.
even want to eat that so much. Like the processed food issue, processed food, I'll just go there. We can go middle path there. Highly processed foods are created for us to want to eat more, right?
Yeah.
They
Yep.
hook us in.
Yep.
It's
They're
hard to stop eating.
pleasurable, they're highly pleasurable,
They're
and
created to be pleasurable, like literally.
depending on what your set point is in your brain's reward center,
Right.
for a lot of people those are just fine and tolerable in, certain doses, and maybe in other doses they're no longer tolerable,
Yeah.
right?
So,
For
I
some
mean,
people with a very like a highly genetically loaded set point, like long family histories of serious addiction,
mhm.
like their reward center set point and circuitry might be very, very easily tipped over into addiction.
Hmm. So interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, one size just doesn't fit all. We didn't, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
that's if I don't, I want that to feel empowering to people, right? Because if something
Yeah.
isn't working for you, it's probably not working for you. And it may
Right.
take a little bit of intuitive eating and a little bit of food addiction and a little bit of finding new
Yes.
people and a little bit of fierce. Like we are such unique beings that the solution, and it may be like for a lot of people I've treated, it's like once they go treat the trauma,
Yep.
they're like, oh, I'm good now.
Yep.
Like
And I
almost,
think, I think the empowering piece of what you just said is your answers are inside. And if something's not working for you, it's not you failing the treatment.
no.
It's that treatment is failing to help you,
Yeah. And then we need
so
to try other
often we,
treatments. Yeah.
yep. And so often we give, inadvertently give the message to patients that they've failed treatment,
Yeah.
like, oh, like give me the give me the details on this patient who wants to come in. Well, they've failed 3 trials of blah, blah, blah. Or
Oh.
even with meds, like they failed 2 trials of, 1 trial of Prozac, 1 trial of Zoloft. How about Zoloft and Prozac failed to help this
Yeah,
person?
doesn't work for them. Absolutely. And
Yes.
I think that's like, I think that's right. And so I mean, I'm always like, I love a good I love good emotions and I love spirit talk, but like sometimes I actually think we just need to become scientists about our own treatment. Like, okay, this didn't work. Let me see what else there is. Let me see if that really sits with me. Wow, that really feels like it could work for me. And even in my experience, if it does work for you, it takes a couple of attempts to try to figure out how. I mean, like I just know with me with my own sugar, it's like wasn't like I was like, oh yeah, we're good. Yeah, no sugar. I was like, oh, maybe I need to go try this a little bit more. And oh no, that really does work for me. And we have such that abstinence violation effect, right? That fear of failure is like we have to, that's what I think has to change altogether. And if you're sitting in session and you feel like that person isn't helping you, get out.
Yeah. Yep.
Get out,
Yeah.
run. It's not you. I promise you're amazing. Get out.
Beware of all or nothing, black and white. There's
Yeah.
very little in medicine, whether we're talking about psychiatry or oncology or anything, where we can say 100% like this
This
is,
works.
yeah.
And certainly not any source. Can I ask you one
Well,
question?
this works for you.
I'm with you.
Yeah,
Kim, do you do your own work?
absolutely.
Me too. I'm like always
Absolutely.
in some kind of therapy, some kind of spirit, always, always. I feel like if I could go back, I'd want to ask every clinician that I've ever sat with, like, tell me about your own. Can you tell me what you're doing to make sure that you're
Yeah.
like,
It
what's your morning
makes
routine like?
it makes a huge difference.
Well,
I
what we're
I
saying is we're these
oftentimes,
two recovering eating disorders practitioners who are like, yeah, I'm pretty aware that I need to go make sure I'm taking care of myself and
yeah,
managing my stuff.
yep, yep. God first, self-care second,
Oh, and
everything else
everything
in my
else
life
after.
after.
Oh,
You know?
yes,
And
yes.
I will say one of the critical pieces for me was doing somatic psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That more than anything else really gave me a sense of safety in my body.
Somatic psychotherapy, just for the is a trauma treatment. Yeah,
Yep,
I did some of it too. It was so hard and so game changing to me because I finally could find my body.
yep, yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love you. I
Love
think
you too,
we need to have
Molly.
like 17 more of these. This was wonderful. I feel like
One
this
is
should be,
not enough.
well, I mean, just for the obviously. Yeah, because I feel like there's just gonna be so many follow-up questions. And we didn't even hear the end of your story. We didn't even hear how you came out of it in and of
Yeah.
itself. I want to hear that. You're wonderful. Thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You're amazing.
Thank you so much for having me and
What a fun
for
time.
being a friend in my life.
Me too. All right.